Christmas Eve was supposed to be filled with laughter and warmth. The whole family gathered together. The lights were sparkling, everyone raising their glasses and wishing for a peaceful new year. I truly believed it would be a night of joy, a night nothing could ruin. But then, a single unexpected sentence from my son changed everything forever. A remark that sounded like a joke ended up exposing a truth I had kept hidden for so long. From that moment on, Christmas was no longer Christmas. It became the night of truth, of pain, and the beginning of a sweet revenge my son never saw coming. Before we dive into the story, if you're watching this video, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Who do you usually spend Christmas with? Christmas Eve. The night outside was painted in white, snowflakes drifting slowly through the still air, landing softly on the frosted windows before melting away into droplets. Inside the house, warmth radiated from every corner. The Christmas tree stood tall in the living room, dressed in shimmering ornaments, golden ribbons, and twinkling lights, crowned by a silver star that seemed to watch over us all. The faint scent of cinnamon and baked gingerbread filled the room, mingling with the soft melody of carols humming from the old record player. It was one of those rare nights when the entire family gathered under the same roof. The grandchildren, their cheeks glowing red from the winter chill, ran around the tree with gleeful squeals, too impatient to wait for the moment the presents could finally be unwrapped. My daughter, Sarah, busied herself tying a loose ribbon back onto a gift box, while her husband placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, smiling the kind of smile that spoke of quiet gratitude. The relatives, seated in the dining room, raised their glasses in laughter, voices overlapping as they toasted to the year gone by and the one to come. And there I was, sitting back in my chair, watching it all with a heart full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. At my age, you stop asking for grand things. You learn to cherish the simple ones. The sight of family gathered together, the sound of laughter, the glow of warmth that makes you forget for a moment how fragile life can be. For me, this Christmas gathering was a gift in itself. I smiled, silently thanking God that I was still here to witness it. Among the crowd, my eyes eventually fell on David, my son, my only son. Once, just the thought of him would have filled me with pride. He was successful, wealthy, a man with influence and ambition. He had built businesses, surrounded himself with people of status, and lived a life many envied. Tonight, he arrived in a perfectly tailored suit, his tie knotted with precision, his shoes polished to a shine. He carried himself with the air of someone who had conquered the world, leaning casually against his chair, a glass of red wine in hand. He laughed easily, too easily perhaps, his voice booming across the table whenever he made a clever remark. On the surface, there was nothing wrong. To anyone else in the room, David looked like the perfect son, confident, accomplished, charismatic. But to me, his father, every gesture carried a weight. The way he avoided meeting my eyes, the subtle pause in his laughter whenever I tried to join the conversation, the air of distance that hung around him like an invisible shield. For years now, something had been broken between us. It wasn't always this way. When he was younger, he would run into my arms after school, showing me his drawings, telling me stories about his day. I still remember the way he'd hold onto my hand when crossing the street, how his trust in me was absolute. But somewhere along the way, perhaps when money started coming in, when success took over, or when pride grew larger than love, the bond began to crack. What used to be warm and effortless between us became stiff, cold, transactional. I had hoped tonight might change that. Christmas was supposed to heal. It was supposed to remind us of what really mattered. I thought, maybe, if I stayed quiet, if I smiled, if I showed him love without condition, then the distance would close, even just a little. That hope glimmered faintly in my heart as I watched him raise his glass and clink it against a friend's. Dinner was served. The table was set with care. Golden candlesticks stood tall, their flames flickering gently, casting soft light across the room. Dishes of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and freshly baked bread were laid out in abundance. As everyone settled into their seats, plates were passed around, laughter picked up again, and the house seemed to pulse with joy. I sat among them, quietly soaking in the moment. The warmth of the room, the closeness of family, the comfort of traditions. It was everything a father could ask for. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe, perhaps foolishly, that this night would remain untouched, that nothing could disturb this fragile peace. But peace, I would soon learn, is always more fragile than it appears, because sometimes it only takes one careless word, one offhand remark, to unravel years of silence. And on that Christmas night, the spark would come not from an enemy, not from a stranger, but from my own son. I didn't know it then, as I watched the candlelight flicker across his face, but I was only moments away from hearing the words that would shatter the night. Words that would rip open old wounds I had buried deep within me. A truth I had tried desperately to protect. A truth that, once spoken, would change everything. Dinner flowed with the gentle rhythm of Christmas tradition. Plates clattered softly, glasses clinked, and the room hummed with conversation. Candles flickered against the polished silverware, casting golden halos on every face. For a moment, the world felt exactly as it should. Warm, familiar, safe. I watched Sarah pass the cranberry sauce to one of her children. She smiled, her cheeks glowing in the candlelight, her laugh rising like music above the chatter. The grandchildren sat restless, their legs swinging beneath the table, whispering jokes they thought no one could hear. My heart swelled as I took it in. This was what I had longed for. Family together, laughter weaving through the night, the illusion that time itself had slowed to honor us. But illusions are fragile things. David, my son, leaned back in his chair with practiced ease. He had always known how to command a room, to fill it with his voice, his presence, his aura of importance. Tonight was no different. His wine glass sparkled as he tilted it, catching the glow of the candles. His tie sat perfectly knotted against his crisp shirt. To the others, he must have looked the picture of confidence, success, and charm. But I, his father, saw something else. I saw the edges of arrogance that pride had sharpened over the years. As the main course wound down, conversation turned casual, playful. Stories of old Christmases surfaced, tales of mischievous pranks and childhood memories. Someone joked about family resemblances, how the grandchildren had Sarah's eyes, their mother's smile, or their father's chin. Laughter rolled down the table like a soft wave. And then David spoke. "Funny thing," he said, twirling his wine as though it held the punchline. "People have always told me I don't really look like Dad. Maybe there's a reason for that." His words sliced through the laughter, and the wave died instantly. At first, I thought I had misheard. The words seemed impossible, absurd. But the silence that followed confirmed I had heard exactly what he said. Sarah froze, her fork hovering above her plate. The cousins exchanged awkward glances, their smiles wilting into confusion. Even the children noticed the shift, their voices fading into uncertain whispers. I felt the air leave my lungs, as though the walls themselves had tightened around me. "David," I said carefully, forcing calm into my tone, "that's not something to joke about." But he smiled, not the smile of amusement, but of challenge. "Why not?" "People have wondered. I've wondered. Maybe Mom had." Secrets, gasps rippled along the table. Sarah's eyes filled instantly with tears, her husband reaching to steady her trembling hand. The room, moments ago filled with warmth, now sat frozen in ice. "You don't mean that," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. David shrugged. "Why not? It's not the first time I've thought it. Tonight seemed as good a night as any to bring it up." The wine in his glass shimmered, mocking me with its steadiness, while my own hands shook beneath the table. "You think this is funny?" I asked, louder now. The words felt jagged in my throat. "No," he said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "I think it's fair. I've never really felt like I belonged. Maybe tonight we stop pretending. Pretending." The word detonated like a bomb in my chest. "Enough," I snapped, the firmness in my voice surprising even me. But David's smirk didn't falter. "Or maybe the truth is just too much for you to admit." Around us, the family shrank into their chairs, unwilling to intervene. The candles hissed softly, their wax dripping like slow tears. The carol playing faintly in the background became a cruel irony, a hymn of peace in a room unraveling into chaos. Sarah shook her head. "David, please stop. Not tonight. Not like this." But David ignored her. His gaze locked on me, sharp and unrelenting. I could feel the sting of decades pressing down. For years, I had chosen silence. Silence to protect. Silence to shield. Silence because some truths could burn a family to ashes. And now, with a few careless words tossed into the air, that silence was breaking apart. "You want to know if you belong?" I said, my voice low but trembling with restrained fury. "You want to test the very foundation of this family in front of everyone? In front of your children?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes told me everything. The arrogance, the hunger, the need to wound. I pushed my plate aside, the scrape of porcelain against wood sounding like thunder in the still room. "This is not the place," I said, forcing steel into my words. "Not tonight. Not here." David leaned back, spreading his arms across the chair as though he had won something. "Maybe it's the perfect place. Maybe everyone deserves to know who we really are." His words cut deeper than he realized, or perhaps he knew exactly what he was doing. Either way, the wound was open, bleeding into the room, staining the night beyond repair. The warmth of Christmas had shattered. What remained was a silence so heavy it threatened to crush us all. I looked around the table, at Sarah's tearful face, at the wide eyes of the grandchildren, at the guests who didn't know where to look. I looked at David, my son, and wondered if he had any idea what he had just set into motion. He thought it was a small argument, a careless remark. But he had no idea. He had no idea that with those few words, he had pulled the first thread of a secret I had fought to keep hidden for decades. A secret that once revealed would change him, change me, change us all. And as the tension simmered, as the silence pressed harder, I knew there was no turning back. No one moved. The candles burned lower, wax leaning like tired shoulders, and the Christmas music, once warm, now sounded distant, like it belonged to another house, another family. David's words still hovered over the table, daring me to respond, daring me to either deny or confess. I stood up slowly, not because I needed to, but because the weight of what had to be said demanded my spine be straight. I reached for my water, not to drink, but to steady my hand. Then I set the glass down and let the silence settle. If a truth is to be told, it must be given room. You want the truth, I said, my voice calm, low. Then you will have it. But after tonight, there is no going back. Sarah's hand found her husband's. The children, sensing the gravity, stayed very still. David met my eyes, and for the first time that evening, there was no smirk, no swagger, only something hard and frightened, hiding behind the bravado. This began, I said, a long time ago. Longer than you know. It began in a hospital room with a conversation I never wanted to have. I watched the confusion flicker, then fade on their faces. I let the room breathe and continued. You were 5, I said to David. You had a fever that wouldn't break. We rushed you in and they ran tests. Too many, it felt like. It turned out to be nothing serious in the end. But one of those tests mentioned a blood type. The doctor spoke in careful words. He said it was curious. Yours didn't line up with mine. It could happen, he said, in rare cases. But he suggested, gently, that if I had questions, I should ask them. I paused. The record player clicked softly as the track changed itself, as if even it were trying to move us along. I went home with your mother that night, I said. I didn't accuse, I didn't shout. I sat at the kitchen table and asked her if there was anything I should know. My throat tightened, but I did not let it close. She cried, I said simply. She cried for a long time. Not because she wanted to hurt me, but because she had been carrying a weight too heavy for one heart. She told me that before our marriage, there had been a break, a single month when we were apart, when pride and youth convinced us we didn't need each other. And in that month, she made a mistake. When we reconciled, she believed the past would stay buried. A new beginning, she said, a clean slate. Then you came, and the slate was no longer clean. The room did not exhale. It hung there, suspended on the edge between night and morning, between what we were and what we would become. Later, I continued. When you were asleep, she handed me a letter. She said if I ever doubted, I should keep it, not to punish her, not to punish you, but to remind me of the truth if the truth demanded to be known. The next day, we agreed we would never speak of it again. We would raise you as ours, because you were ours, in every way that matters. David's jaw clenched. So you knew, he said, voice brittle. You knew all this time, and you said nothing. I knew, I said. And I said nothing. For you. Because I loved you. Because I believed a family is not just built from blood. It is built from breakfasts and late-night talks and scraped knees and piano recitals and the way a child runs into his father's arms when the world is too big. He shook his head slowly, like a man losing his footing on ice. You could have told me. And what would I have told a 5-year-old? I asked. Or a 10-year-old? Or a teenager trying to become a man? I chose silence, David, not because I was weak, but because love is sometimes quieter than pride. I looked at Sarah. She was crying openly now, tears moving without shame. She had always felt everything more deeply than her brother. I had proof, I said, turning back to David. I kept it locked away. I prayed I'd never need it. But you asked tonight, and you asked not with humility, but with contempt. In front of your family, in front of your children, You wanted the truth. I reached into my jacket and placed a thin, weathered envelope on the table. The edges were softened by time. My name was written across the front in your mother's hand, a script that had always looked like music to me. I read it once, I said, and then never again. I didn't need to. The contents were not for living by, they were for enduring. But if you insist on certainty, if you want something you can hold in your hand, then here it is. Nobody reached for it. Not David, not Sarah. It sat there, like an extra place at the table for someone we had been pretending wasn't there. David swallowed. And a test? The word tasted sour to him. There is one, I said. I did it quietly years ago when your mother was ill. We were facing our own mortality. I had to put our affairs in order. I kept everything sealed with the attorney, not because I wanted to spring it on you like this, but because I knew there might come a day when rumor and poison would try to rewrite our family. Sarah whispered, "Dad," not to stop me, but to steady me. I kept my gaze on David. "You are not my son by blood," I said, and felt the floor tilt, felt the roof of our house creak beneath the weight of that sentence. "But you are my son by every choice I have made for the last 32 years. I carried you in the dead of night when you had nightmares. I worked double shifts to pay for your first semester when the scholarship fell through. I stood up for you when a teacher said you were a lost cause. I clapped the loudest at your graduation. I held my tongue when success changed your voice. I kept loving you when you made it hard to be loved." His face crumpled, then hardened again, as if grief were something to wrestle to the ground. "So all this time?" I was a lie. "No," I said, firmer than before. "A lie is something told to deceive. You were a life that we chose to honor. Blood is truth, yes, but it is not the only truth. Love is also truth. Commitment is truth. The name on your birth certificate, my name, is truth I signed with my hand and sealed with my heart." The room shivered with the old house's bones. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and relentless. Somewhere, a child sniffled and was hushed with a held breath. "What I cannot accept," I continued, "is contempt. Not for me, but for what built this family. You stood in this room on a night that should have been safe, and you used your wealth, your status, your cleverness to belittle the man who raised you. You reached for the cruelest blade you could find, and you twisted it. That is not a question asked in search of healing. That is a wound delivered to humiliate. I let that land. Then, gentler. If you had come to me in private, I would have told you everything. I would have opened the envelope with you. I would have shown you the test. We would have cried. And then we would have found a way forward. Because that's what fathers and sons do when they are brave." He stared at the envelope as if it could leap and bite him. "What does this mean? For us?" His voice was smaller now, a hollow echo of the man who had swaggered in 2 hours earlier. "It means," I said, "that the truth is out. It means that your mother's mistake will not be used as a weapon any longer, not by me, not by you. It means that if you want a father, you still have one. But you will speak to him with respect. And if you want to be a father to your own children, you will show them what humility looks like when pride finally meets a wall." I took a breath I had been holding for years. "There is one more thing you should know," I added. "Legal truth exists too. The family assets were placed in a trust long ago. Your mother and I made that decision together. The trust does not measure blood. It measures character and responsibility. It protects the family from pride. including mine, including yours. David blinked, startled. The word trust cut through the fog like a bell. This is not about punishing you, I said quietly. This is about protecting what remains after a storm blows through. Tonight is a storm. What survives will be what we have chosen carefully. Love, if you'll accept it. Boundaries, if you won't. No one applauded. No one argued. The envelope lay between us. A small, silent country that either of us could cross if we had the courage. I sat down. The music on the record player found its way back to a carol about peace on earth and mercy mild. It sounded almost cruel, almost tender. David reached for the envelope, then stopped, his fingers hovering over the paper as if it were hot. He wasn't ready. I understood. Some truths are too bright to look at directly. He stood, pushed his chair in slowly, and excused himself from the table. Not a word, not a slam of the door. Just footsteps disappearing down the hallway and a house that had to relearn how to breathe. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. The grandchildren leaned into their parents. And I, a man who had just spent the last of his silence, stared at the candle's flame and watched it steady itself. Christmas had revealed what it had to reveal. The night was not over, and neither was what had to come next. Because truth is not the end of a story. It is the turning of a page. And on the next page, consequences wait with patient hands. The house was quieter than it had ever been. After David stormed away from the table, the only sounds left were the faint creaks of the old floorboards and the muffled cries of my daughter trying to calm her children. The warmth of Christmas Eve had dissolved into a tension so heavy it clung to the air like smoke after a fire. I remained seated, staring at the envelope that still lay untouched at the center of the table. Its presence mocked us all. For years, it had been hidden away, silent, harmless. Now it sat exposed, demanding attention. David hadn't opened it, but the damage was done. His reckless words had forced a truth into the light that could never be shoved back into the dark. I leaned back slowly, my chest rising with a long breath. For decades, I had tried to shield him, shield everyone from the complications of the past. I had swallowed pride, endured slights, and chosen love over confrontation. But tonight, as I looked at the empty chair where David had sat, I realized something undeniable. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken my restraint for surrender, and that mistake was going to cost him. I turned to the others, my voice steady but laced with the weight of finality. "This night has changed," I said. "There will be no more lies, and there will be no more indulgence of arrogance." Sarah looked up at me, her face still pale from the revelation. "Dad, what are you going to do?" I let my eyes settle back on the envelope before answering. What I should have done a long time ago. The next morning, Christmas Day, the house was quiet again, but not with joy. The children played listlessly, their laughter subdued, sensing something had fractured in the family. I stepped into my study, shutting the door behind me, and opened the drawer that had been locked for years. Inside was a folder, thick with documents I had prepared but never used. Bank statements, trust papers, property deeds. The quiet architecture of power that I had built over decades of labor and sacrifice. For years, I had allowed David to believe the illusion that he was the provider, the benefactor, the one who held the strings. I let him hand me money, pretend that I relied on his success, while the truth remained buried in locked drawers and sealed envelopes. I had told myself it was easier this way. Easier to let him have his pride. to let him think he was the head of the family. But pride left unchecked becomes poison. And last night, that poison spilled over. Now it was time to cure it. 2 days later, David arrived at my house, his expression tight, his voice sharp. "We need to talk," he said. He looked tired, as though the weight of the revelation hadn't allowed him a full night's sleep. "Of course," I replied evenly, stepping aside to let him in. He wasted no time. "What you said, what you revealed, it complicates everything. Do you realize what people will think? Do you realize how it makes me look?" I studied him carefully. "You mean how it makes you look? Not how it made your sister feel? Not how it made this family shake?" He waved his hand dismissively. "I'm talking about the bigger picture. Business partners, reputation, legacy. If this story gets out, I cut him off with a sharp look. The story got out because of you, David. Because you couldn't control your tongue. You turned a Christmas dinner into a spectacle." He clenched his jaw but said nothing. I rose from my chair, moved to the cabinet, and withdrew the folder. I laid it gently on the table between us. "This is the truth you never knew," I said. "The financial truth. The legal truth." He frowned, hesitating before opening it. His eyes scanned the documents, widening as realization dawned. Property deeds in my name. Bank accounts far exceeding the allowance he had so proudly handed me. Trust arrangements signed years before his first business venture. Slowly, the arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear. "You." His voice cracked. "You controlled all of this? All this time?" "Yes," I said. "While you believed I depended on your generosity, I was ensuring that the family's future was secure. Your allowance was never for me, David. It was for you, a test. And last night, you failed it." He slammed the folder shut. "Why would you hide this from me?" "Because you weren't ready," I said firmly. "Because power in the hands of arrogance destroys everything it touches. And last night proved me right." He stared at me, breathing hard, his pride bleeding into desperation. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in years. Now the game changes. The trust has been rewritten. Your arrogance has cost you privileges you thought were guaranteed. From this moment on, you will learn humility the hard way." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no words came. For the first time in years, my son was speechless. I stood, placing a hand on the folder. "You wanted the truth. You got it. But remember, David, truth has consequences. And Christmas may be a season of giving. But tonight, I take back what should never have been yours to abuse." That night, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storm had broken, yes, but in its aftermath, there was clarity. My son had sought to humiliate me with words. Instead, he had unmasked himself, and now, with the truth of both blood and wealth revealed, the balance of power had shifted. This was no longer about secrets. This was about justice, about reclaiming dignity, about ensuring that arrogance paid its price. And so began the quiet work of my revenge. Not with rage, not with noise, but with the silent, deliberate movements of a man who had been underestimated for far too long. Sweet revenge doesn't shout. It waits. It builds. It teaches. and David was about to learn its lesson. David left my house that night with the folder still burning in his hands. He hadn't said much on his way out, only muttered something about fixing this, and slammed the door harder than necessary. But I could see it. The tremor in his fingers, the panic behind his eyes. For the first time in years, he realized he was not in control. And soon, the consequences began to unfold. It started with the allowance. For years, David had strutted around, reminding me and others of the support he gave me. The monthly checks, the small gestures that he paraded as proof of his generosity. The irony, of course, was that I had never needed them. They were his leash, not my lifeline. So I cut the leash. The next month, when his assistant delivered the check as usual, I returned it sealed in an envelope. Alongside it, I included copies of the trust documents he had refused to study carefully the night we spoke. A handwritten note sat on top. A father should never live on his son's charity. From now on, you will learn what it means to stand on your own, without humiliating those who built the ground beneath you. He didn't reply directly, but I heard from Sarah that he had thrown the envelope against the wall of his office, furious. His pride had taken its first real wound. Then came the business dinners. David loved hosting them, gathering partners and clients around expensive tables, speaking with the authority of a man who believed the world bent to him. But whispers have a way of spreading, especially after Christmas Eve. Relatives talk. Friends repeat what they heard. Soon, questions about his lineage, about whether he was truly the heir he claimed to be, began surfacing. At first, he dismissed them as gossip. But gossip has teeth. One partner pulled out of a deal, citing instability in the family structure. Another postponed negotiations until things were clarified. David, the man who had once walked into every room with his head held high, now found doors quietly closing in his face. And every time, I said nothing. Silence was its own kind of revenge. But the hardest blow didn't come from business. It came from home. One evening, weeks after Christmas, Sarah called me. Her voice shook with both anger and pity. "Dad," she said, "David came over last night. He was drunk, ranting about how you humiliated him, how you took everything away from him." The children heard him shouting. They were terrified. My heart ached, but my resolve didn't waver. "And what did you do?" I asked. "I told him the truth," Sarah said firmly. "That it wasn't you who humiliated him. It was his own arrogance. That he brought this on himself." For the first time, I realized my daughter had inherited more strength than I had ever given her credit for. She was willing to confront the storm her brother had become, and I silently thanked God that not all of my children had lost their way. David tried to confront me again weeks later. He came to my home, eyes bloodshot, his words slurred with frustration. "You think you've won, don't you?" He spat. "You think you've beaten me because of some papers, some secrets? I'll bounce back. I always do." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man before me was not the son I had raised. He was a shadow, consumed by pride, blinded by his need to control. "This isn't about winning," I said calmly. "This is about truth. And truth, David, doesn't disappear just because you scream at it. You wanted answers. Now you must live with them." His face twisted, torn between rage and despair. He wanted to argue, but there were no words left to fight with. Not against the documents, not against the blood tests, not against the silence of a father who no longer played his games. He left again, slamming the door, and I let him go. The weeks turned into months. Slowly, the ripples of his actions spread. Friends who once praised him began to keep their distance. Family members who once admired him now looked at him with pity. And in business, where reputation is currency, his fortune began to shrink. Deals collapsed. Partners withdrew. The empire he had built on arrogance started to crack piece by piece. And through it all, I remained quiet. I did not gloat. I did not boast. I simply watched the consequences of pride take their natural course. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "This is not the end. This is only the beginning of his lesson." Late one night, as snow fell again outside my window, another winter settling in, I sat in my study with the envelope once more in front of me. The letter from his mother, the test results, the documents. Proof, pain, power, all of it lay there. Silent witnesses to a history that had finally come to light. I realized then that revenge, at its sweetest, is not loud or violent. It is quiet. It is patient. It is watching the arrogant stumble over the weight of their own pride until they are forced to see what they had refused to see. And for David, that process had only just begun. Because the greatest consequence was not the loss of money, not the whispers of doubt, not even the broken business deals. The greatest consequence was this: he had shattered the very foundation of respect between father and son. And now he would have to live in the shadow of that brokenness, knowing that his arrogance had cost him the one thing wealth could never buy back: honor. That night, I closed the folder and locked it away again. But this time, I did so with a calm heart. The secret was no longer a burden I carried. It was a lesson he would carry, every day, every year, until the weight finally humbled him. And when it did, if it ever did, I would be waiting, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the quiet, steady presence of a father who had chosen the long road of justice over the quick fix of rage. That, I realized, was the true shape of sweet revenge. Spring arrived shyly that year, as if it too was unsure whether our house still deserved gentleness. The snow melted in slow confession, revealing the grass beneath, patchy, stubborn, alive. I spent long mornings in the kitchen with the window cracked open, listening to the drip of thaw and the ticking of the old clock. Peace had returned, but it wasn't the same peace as before. It was quieter, wiser, stitched with new seams. David hadn't called for weeks. When he finally did, his message was short. "Can we talk?" He came on a Sunday, without his car of spectacle, without the shield of friends. He looked smaller, not in height, but in certainty. Pride had left him like a tide going out. "I've been angry," he said, standing in the doorway before he had the courage to sit. "At you, at Mom, at the world, at myself." He exhaled. "I don't know who to be without the story I built about myself." "You could start with a true one," I said. "You can't control the blood you were born with, David. But you can control the man you decide to be." He nodded, eyes fixed on the table where the envelope had once lain. "If I apologize, will it fix it?" "No," I said gently. "Apologies don't fix. They open doors. What repairs a house is work." He swallowed. "Then tell me the work." I had spent the winter deciding exactly that. How to make my revenge mean something more than pain. Destruction is easy. Correction is harder. And love, when it grows up, chooses the hard thing. "First," I said, "you will apologize to your sister and to your children. Not in a text. Not with gifts. In your own voice. You will use the words you refuse to use." I was wrong. "Second, you will meet with the family attorney. Not to beg for positions in the trust, but to read the conditions you ignored. Third, you will choose humility that can be measured. He frowned. Measured how? By presence, I said. By service. 2 nights a week with your children where your phone stays off. Not Disneyland fathering. Homework. Bedtime. Listening. And 1 day a month at the shelter downtown. You will pack boxes and carry them out to cars until your palms know the weight of other people's hunger. He waited for the part where I would add the money back, where I would hand him the old permissions. It didn't come. And the trust? He asked finally. It stands, I said. Your distributions are tied to accountability now, sobriety, mentorship, consistency. If you want influence, you must practice stewardship. If you want power, you must practice restraint. He looked at me as if I had moved the horizon. This is permanent? Boundaries are not punishments, I said. They are promises we make to protect what love builds. He looked away, and for a long moment, we listened to the clock together. Then he nodded once. I don't know if I can be that man, he admitted. You won't be at first, I said. You'll fail. Then you'll try again. That's how men are made. He laughed, a small, fragile sound. And you? Will you still be here? I will always be the father who chose you, I said. But I will not be the audience to your arrogance. Those days are gone. He stayed for coffee. He washed the mugs when we finished. An ordinary act that felt like a tiny miracle. When he left, he shook my hand and didn't try to crush it. Progress can be quiet enough to miss if you're not watching. Weeks became months. The first apologies were clumsy, but real. Sarah called afterward, crying in that clean way that means the tears are washing something, not drowning it. He looked me in the eye, Dad, she said. He didn't make excuses. The children reported that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, their father now smelled like dish soap and library books. At the shelter, they gave him the heavy boxes first, then the heavier stories. He learned to say sir and ma'am to people who had nothing he wanted. Business slowed, then steadied. Real partners, those who cared about substance, returned. The ones who fed on rumor found other tables to haunt. David showed up to meetings with fewer words and more notes. He said, "I don't know" 3 times in a single afternoon without flinching. That is a sentence that only men who have wrestled their pride can say. I did not reward him with fanfare. I did not unlock the old accounts. I praised what should be praised. Consistency over fireworks, presence over performance. Revenge, I discovered, is sweetest when it refuses to be theatrical. It tastes like a boundary kept, like a quiet standard raised and never lowered again. One evening in late summer, David asked if he could see the envelope. I studied his face. There was no dare in it, only grief. I brought it from the drawer and set it on the table between us. He didn't touch it. I think, he said, I don't need to open it anymore. That would be wise, I said. Could we? He hesitated, then finished. Could we put it away together? So we did. He watched as I slid it back into the drawer and turned the key. Then he stayed for dinner. And when the grandchildren burst in with their stories, he listened like a man who had finally learned that the room does not belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the most present heart. On the first Christmas after the thaw, our house felt different, not because the tree was taller or the food better, but because we had stopped pretending. Truth had become furniture, solid, useful, familiar. We did not sit around it nervously. We leaned on it. We passed dishes across it. We laughed next to it. Even the carols sounded honest, less like promises we hoped for and more like realities we had chosen. Near midnight, David asked if he could speak. He stood without a glass in his hand, without a story about money or deals. He looked at his children first. "I have been a proud man," he said. "Pride made me cruel to the people I love. I am learning how to be small in the right ways so I can be strong in the right ways. If I ever forget, I give you permission to remind me." Then he turned to me. "Thank you for choosing me," he said, "even when I did not choose you." I felt the ache of years rise, then settle. "A father's choosing," I said, "is the one contract pride can't cancel." That night, after the dishes were stacked and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in the living room and wrote a letter to my grandchildren. I told them what I had learned too late and was trying to learn still. That blood is a kind of truth, but not the deepest one. That love without respect becomes weakness, and respect without love becomes tyranny. That the world will tell them revenge is victory over an enemy, but the sweetest revenge is mastery over yourself. "Remember," I wrote, "to keep what is worth keeping and to set boundaries around it. Remember to pay your debts before you count your victories. Remember that apologies open doors, but habits keep them open. And when a story demands truth, give it, then live in it." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, not with the old envelope, but in front of it, as if to say, "This is the paper we live by now." In the end, I did not burn the past. I contained it. I did not erase my son. I required him. And I did not win by breaking him. I won by refusing to break with the truth. Christmas will never return to what it was before that night. It has become something rarer, a yearly oath we take without saying it out loud, that in this house we measure a man not by the story he tells about his blood, but by the care he gives to the people who bear his name. If there is a lesson I can hand you like a warm cup on a cold evening, it is this: choose the hard love, keep the quiet boundary, and let your justice be steady enough to teach. The world loves a dramatic ending. I prefer a faithful one. And that, I have learned, is the only revenge that lasts. The following year moved slower, as if time itself had chosen to walk beside me rather than rush ahead. Age has a way of changing the rhythm of life. But perhaps it was not age alone. Perhaps it was the weight of the lessons that had finally been learned. David continued his quiet transformation. There were setbacks, of course. A man does not unlearn arrogance overnight. Some days he spoke too quickly, other days he struggled with silence. But each stumble seemed softer than the last, as if he no longer feared the fall. What mattered was that he kept returning, kept showing up. I often watched him with his children, noticing the way he now bent down to listen rather than towering above them with orders, the way he carried their school projects like treasures, not burdens. Once, I saw him kneel on the floor, helping his daughter tie her shoe, and the look on her face, the look of trust, was more valuable than all the contracts he had ever signed. And in those small, ordinary moments, I found the proof I had long prayed for. My revenge was never meant to destroy him. It was meant to strip him of the armor that was crushing him from the inside. It was meant to teach him the cost of arrogance, so he could finally rediscover the worth of humility. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about the envelope. It remained locked away, yellowing in the dark. I realized then that it was no longer a weapon, no longer a threat. It was history, painful, complicated, but powerless unless we gave it power. The new letter, the one I wrote for my grandchildren, had become the more important paper. It was not about secrets. It was about inheritance of character. When the day comes and I am no longer here, I want them to know. Wealth can be built and lost. Bloodlines can twist and turn. But respect is the currency that never devalues. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the night that had changed everything, we gathered once again around the same table. The house glowed with the same lights, the same carols floated through the air. But this time, the warmth was different. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't pretending. It was earned. David rose at the end of dinner, not with a smirk, not with wine in hand, but with humility in his eyes. He looked at his children first, then at me. "I'm not the same man I was last year," he said, "and I know I'll never fully erase the hurt I caused. But I want this house to remember me as someone who tried, someone who learned, someone who finally understood what it means to be a son and a father." Tears blurred my vision, but they were not the same tears of grief that had once stained that table. These were tears of restoration. As I sat there, surrounded by family, I thought of all the roads that had brought us here. The lies, the silence, the arrogance, the truth, and finally, the slow work of redemption. If there is one lesson left for me to share, for you listening to this story now, it is this: don't wait for pride to write your family story. Write it with honesty before it breaks. Don't wait for silence to become poison. Speak, even if your voice trembles. And don't confuse revenge with cruelty. The sweetest revenge is not to see someone fall. It is to see them stand straighter because you held the line. Christmas will always remind me of the night my son tried to cut me with words. But it will also remind me of the year he learned to heal with actions. And that, more than wealth, more than legacy, is the gift I choose to carry into the years ahead. As the lights dimmed that night and the house grew still, I realized something important. This story wasn't over. Christmas had given us the first taste of truth. But truth alone doesn't close a wound. It takes time, patience, and choices that will test us again and again. My son had taken the first step, yes. But the road ahead was long, and not every turn would be easy. And perhaps that is where the real lesson lies. Families don't heal in a single night. They heal in the days that follow, in the way we face the next storm, in whether we choose pride again or finally learn humility. This was only one chapter of our journey. The next one may surprise you even more. I thought the hardest part was behind us. The truth had been spoken, the silence broken, and for the first time in years, David seemed willing to learn humility. But life has a way of testing the lessons we claim to have learned, and our test arrived sooner than I expected. It began with a letter, not an old letter like the one his mother had left me, but a new one, delivered in a heavy envelope marked urgent. It came from a law firm, one I didn't recognize, and it wasn't addressed to me, but to David. He brought it to me the very next day, his hands trembling. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "they're suing me." I took the papers, read them carefully, and felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't a small matter. It was a lawsuit from one of his former partners, a man who claimed David had misled him in a series of investments. The numbers weren't small either. It was millions. If the case held, David could lose more than money. He could lose everything he had left of his reputation. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing wealth, he had plenty of that, but the fear of exposure, of being dragged through the mud in public. Pride had been his armor for so long, and now it was cracking in front of him. "What do I do?" he whispered. I should have felt vindicated. This was the natural consequence of his arrogance. But instead, I felt something else, a mix of sorrow and determination. This was not just his battle. This was the storm our family would have to face together. "First," I said, placing the papers back into his hands, "you face it honestly. No more lies, no more pretending. If you made mistakes, you admit them. If you wronged someone, you make it right. Running will only make the wolves hungrier." He nodded, but his face was pale. "And if I lose?" "Then you learn," I said firmly, "and you rebuild. But this time, you rebuild with honesty." In the weeks that followed, the lawsuit consumed him. He spent long nights meeting with lawyers, combing through contracts, reliving decisions he had made in arrogance. And every time he sat in my kitchen with weary eyes, I reminded him, humility is not weakness. It is strength under control. Show the court who you are now, not who you were. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had quietly begun my own preparations. I had contacts, old friends who owed me favors, truths hidden in drawers that could shift the balance. If David was truly ready to change, I would stand beside him. But if he faltered back into pride, then my next move would remind him, once and for all, where the real power lay. Because love forgives, but sweet revenge ensures the lesson is never forgotten. If you've stayed with me through this story, I thank you, and I promise, the story doesn't end here. There will be more to tell, more truths to uncover, and more lessons to share. Before we continue to the next part, please take a moment to support this journey. Hit the like button so we know you're here. Press subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And leave a comment below. Tell me, what lesson did you take from this Christmas night? Finally, don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Because stories grow stronger when they're shared. And maybe the next part will touch someone you love.